When a new hospital director takes over, the atmosphere shifts overnight. Dr. Malcolm Johnson, a brilliant black surgeon, suddenly finds himself ignored, disrespected, and pushed aside. But what the director doesn't know is, Malcolm is not one to stay silent. As the discrimination grows, so does Malcolm's determination to fight back. What happens next will shake the entire hospital to its core. The sterile hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Dr. Malcolm Johnson scrubbed his hands at the sink, preparing for yet another grueling shift at St. Augustine's Hospital in London. The city outside thrummed with life. Rain-slicked streets reflecting the glow of double-decker buses and the distant chime of Big Ben echoing through the misty evening. Inside, though, the air felt heavier, laced with an unspoken tension that had been building for weeks. Malcolm was a trauma surgeon, one of the best in the UK. At 42, he'd earned a reputation for steady hands and an unshakable calm under pressure. His skin, a rich brown that stood out against the crisp white of his coat, bore the quiet pride of a man who'd fought tooth and nail to rise above every obstacle thrown his way. Born to Jamaican immigrants in Brixton, he'd clawed his way through medical school, defying the odds stacked against him in a system that rarely made room for people like him. Patients trusted him. Colleagues admired him. The hospital's trauma unit had thrived under his leadership. That was, until Dr. Raymond Ellis arrived. Ellis had swept into St. Augustine's 3 months ago, a silver-haired transplant from Manchester with a clipped accent and a resume dripping with accolades. As the new hospital director, he carried himself with the cold precision of a man who'd spent decades climbing the greasy pole of medical bureaucracy. His pale blue eyes seemed to assess everyone like specimens under a microscope. And from the moment he met Malcolm, those eyes had lingered a fraction too long, judging, dismissing. It started subtly. Malcolm noticed his name disappearing from the roster for high-stakes surgeries, cases he'd once led with flawless execution. A gunshot victim with a shredded femoral artery? Assigned to Dr. Peter Grayson, a jittery white surgeon 5 years Malcolm's junior with half his experience. A multi-car pileup on the M25 requiring a craniotomy? Handed to Dr. Sarah Whitmore, whose hands shook during her last procedure. Malcolm's protests were met with vague excuses from Ellis. We're redistributing workload, or the board wants fresh perspectives. But Malcolm wasn't naive. He'd seen the pattern before, felt it in the sidelong glances of certain professors in med school, heard it in the clipped tones of administrators who'd assumed he was there on a diversity quota. This wasn't about workload. This was personal. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday in late February. Malcolm was in the break room, sipping tepid coffee, when Grayson burst in, his face flushed with panic. "Malcolm, I need you in OR3, now. The aortic repair's going south. Ellis put me on it, but I'm in over my head." Malcolm didn't hesitate. He scrubbed in, stepping into the operating room, where a 19-year-old motorbike crash victim lay bleeding out. Grayson's hands trembled as he fumbled with the clamps, sweat beading on his forehead. I don't know what to do," he stammered. "Step aside," Malcolm said, his voice low and firm. He took over, his movements swift and precise, repairing the torn aorta with the skill of a maestro conducting a symphony. The patient stabilized. The room exhaled. But the victory was short-lived. An hour later, Ellis summoned Malcolm to his office. The director sat behind a polished oak desk, his fingers steepled, his expression icy. "You overstepped," Ellis said, his voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. "Grayson was the lead surgeon. You had no business interfering." Malcolm's jaw tightened. "Grayson was drowning. That kid would have died." Grayson would have managed, Ellis snapped, though the lie hung heavy in the air. You're not the only capable surgeon here, Johnson. Perhaps it's time you accepted that. The words landed like a punch. Malcolm leaned forward, his voice steady but laced with fire. I've been saving lives in this hospital for 12 years. My record speaks for itself. What's your excuse for sidelining me? Ellis's lips curled into a thin, mirthless smile. Careful, Johnson. Accusations like that could ruin a career. The threat lingered as Malcolm left the office, his pulse pounding in his ears. That night, he sat in his flat overlooking the Thames, the city's lights blurring through the rain-streaked window. He opened his laptop and began typing. Every ignored case, every snide remark, every time Ellis had bypassed him for a less qualified white surgeon. If they wanted a fight, he'd give them one. The next morning, Malcolm woke to the gray drizzle of London's skyline. His resolve hardened. He'd spent half the night documenting everything: dates, times, patient files, and Ellis's dismissive comments. It wasn't just a hunch anymore. It was a pattern, a trail of evidence glowing like embers in the dark. He wasn't about to let Ellis dismantle his career without a fight. At St. Augustine's, the atmosphere had shifted. Nurses whispered in corners, their eyes darting toward Malcolm as he passed. Grayson avoided him entirely, ducking into a supply closet when their paths nearly crossed. Malcolm didn't blame him. Peter was a decent guy, just a pawn in Ellis's game. But the silence from his colleagues stung. They knew something was wrong, yet no one spoke up. In the trauma ward, Malcolm found his next move. A memo pinned to the bulletin board announced a new protocol. All major surgical assignments would now require Ellis's direct approval. It was a power grab dressed as procedure, and Malcolm's name was conspicuously absent from the week's schedule. He ripped the memo down, crumpling it in his fist, and headed to the records room. There he enlisted an ally. Nurse Aisha Patel, a sharp-eyed woman who'd worked alongside him for years. Aisha had immigrated from Mumbai a decade ago, and she'd seen her share of subtle slights in the NHS. She didn't need convincing. "This is bullshit, Malcolm," she muttered, pulling files from the cabinet. "Ellis has it out for you. I've watched him pass you over for weeks. Meanwhile, Whitmore botched a splenectomy last Thursday, and he didn't bat an eye." "I need proof," Malcolm said, scanning a chart. "Something concrete. Patient outcomes, reassignment logs, anything that shows he's targeting me." Aisha nodded, her hijab brushing her shoulder as she handed him a stack of records. "Start with these, I'll dig deeper, but be careful, he's got eyes everywhere." By noon, Malcolm had a dossier. 10 cases in 2 months where he'd been replaced by less experienced surgeons, 6 of which had complications, 2 fatal. The numbers didn't lie. Neither did the email he found buried in his inbox, sent weeks ago from Ellis to the board. "Dr. Johnson's approach is outdated. We need new blood to maintain our standards." Outdated? Malcolm had pioneered half the trauma protocols still in use. That evening, he met with Priya Khan, a civil rights lawyer recommended by a friend. Priya's office sat above a kebab shop in Whitechapel, the smell of grilled meat wafting through the cracked window. She was a petite woman with a steel gaze, her desk cluttered with case files and a half-empty cup of chai. "Discrimination's a tough sell without a smoking gun," Priya said, flipping through Malcolm's notes. "But this is a start. Systematic exclusion, poor patient outcomes. That email, we can build a case. First, we file a formal complaint with the hospital. Force their hand." "And if they bury it?" Malcolm asked. Priya smirked. "Then we go public. The NHS hates a scandal. But you need more. Witnesses, ideally. Anyone willing to talk? Malcolm thought of Aisha, of the nurses' hushed voices. I'll find them. The complaint went in the next day, a quiet grenade lobbed into Ellis's pristine world. By afternoon, the fallout began. Malcolm was called to a meeting with HR, two stone-faced women and a nervous junior administrator. Ellis wasn't there, but his presence loomed. We've received your concerns, Dr. Johnson, the lead HR officer, Ms. Carter, said. Her tone clipped. These are serious allegations. We'll investigate. How long? Malcolm pressed. These things take time, weeks, possibly months. Patients don't have months, he shot back. Neither do I. Carter's lips thinned, but she said nothing more. As Malcolm left, he caught a glimpse of Ellis through the glass-walled conference room, barking orders at Grayson. Their eyes met for a split second. Ellis's cold, Malcolm's defiant. The war was on. That night, Aisha texted him. Check your email. Found something big. Attached was a PDF, a performance review from Ellis, dated a week ago, rating Malcolm as unsatisfactory despite his flawless record. It was a lie, a fabricated justification. Malcolm forwarded it to Priya, his blood boiling. But the real shock came the next morning. Aisha didn't show up for her shift. Her phone went straight to voicemail. When Malcolm asked around, a janitor muttered, She got escorted out last night. Security. No explanation. Ellis was closing ranks. Malcolm stood in the hospital lobby, staring at the spot where Aisha used to greet him with a wry smile. Her absence was a gut punch, a warning shot. He stormed to HR, demanding answers, but Carter stonewalled him. Ms. Patel's employment status is confidential. Confidentiality didn't explain the fear in the janitor's eyes. Priya was livid when he called her. They're retaliating. We escalate. Now. I'm drafting a whistleblower claim and looping in the General Medical Council. If Aisha talks, we've got them. If she talks. Malcolm spent the day tracking her down, finally finding her at a cafe in Camden, hunched over a tea, her face drawn. They fired me, Malcolm, she whispered. Said I breached patient confidentiality. It's nonsense. I didn't even access those files they claimed. They're scared, Malcolm said. You've got leverage. Will you testify? Aisha hesitated, then nodded. For you, yeah. But they'll come for me harder. Let them try, he said, though the weight of her sacrifice gnawed at him. The whistleblower claim hit like a thunderclap. Within days, the hospital launched an internal investigation, a reluctant nod to the mounting pressure. Priya worked the press, leaking just enough to stir whispers. Racism at St. Augustine's. Twitter buzzed with #Justice for Johnson, and protesters gathered outside, their signs bobbing in the rain. Ellis doubled down. He called an all-staff meeting, his voice smooth as he addressed the packed auditorium. These accusations are baseless, a distraction from our mission, Dr. Johnson's performance has been under review for months, nothing more. Malcolm sat in the back, arms crossed, as murmurs rippled through the room. Some nodded at Ellis's words. Others shot Malcolm sympathetic glances. The divide was clear. Then came the breakthrough. A junior nurse, Liam O'Connor, slipped Malcolm a USB drive in the parking lot. I'm risking my job, Liam muttered, his freckled face pale. Recordings, Ellis and the board. They didn't know I was in the room. The audio was damning. Ellis's voice crisp and venomous. Johnson's a liability, too vocal, too urban. We need surgeons who fit our image. Another voice, a board member. Agreed. Promote Grayson. He's pliable. Priya pounced. The recordings went to the investigators, the GMC, and, after a calculated leak, the BBC. The story exploded. Systemic racism uncovered at London hospital. Ellis's face plastered every newsstand, his icy composure cracking. The investigation wrapped in weeks, not months. Ellis was sacked, along with 2 board members. Grayson resigned, shamefaced. The hospital offered Malcolm a leadership role, not just his old job, but a seat at the table to overhaul the culture. Malcolm stood at the podium during a press conference, the room packed with reporters. Rain streaked the windows, but inside, the air buzzed with hope. "This isn't about revenge," he said, his voice steady. "It's about accountability. Patients deserve better. We all do." He took the role, not for power, but for progress. Aisha got her job back, with back pay. The hospital rolled out new policies, though Malcolm knew change wouldn't come overnight. Racism didn't vanish with a firing. It lingered, subtle and insidious, in every corner of the world. As he walked through the ward one evening, a young black intern approached him. "Dr. Johnson? I want to be like you someday." Malcolm smiled, but his eyes were distant. "Keep fighting, kid. It's not over." Outside, London hummed on, its pulse unbroken. The fight wasn't finished, not for Malcolm, not for anyone. And somewhere, in another hospital, another city, the same story played out, waiting for its own champion.